The day I arrived in the small seaside town felt like the first breath of air after being submerged underwater for far too long. The capital had been suffocating, its endless skyline of glass and steel, the relentless hum of traffic, the sterile, fluorescent lights of the hospital that never dimmed. It had become a labyrinth of routine and repetition, each day blurring into the next with a numbing regularity. I was drowning in it, and I knew I needed to get out before I lost myself completely. I still remember the moment I first saw the town as the train pulled in. The platform was almost deserted, the kind of quiet that felt like an invitation to something new. The air was different, cleaner, saltier, infused with the scent of the ocean and blooming wildflowers. I could see the sea from the station, a vast, endless stretch of blue that seemed to promise freedom, a fresh start. As I stepped off the train, I felt lighter, as if I'd left the weight of the city behind. My new home was a small, weathered cottage on the outskirts of town. It was nothing like the sleek, modern apartment I'd had in the city. The walls were painted in soft, muted colors that reminded me of the sea at dusk, and the furniture was a mismatched collection of pieces that had clearly been chosen for comfort rather than style. There was a garden out back, overgrown and wild, with fragrant lavender and rosemary bushes that swayed in the breeze. It was perfect in its imperfection, and as I unpacked my few belongings, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in years. The days began to fall into a gentle rhythm. I would wake up early, the sunlight streaming through the thin curtains, and go for a run along the beach. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was a far cry from the sirens and honking horns I was used to, and with each step, I felt my mind clearing, the stress and anxiety of the past slowly ebbing away. At the small clinic where I'd started working, things were different too. The pace was slower, more humane. My patients were no longer just names on a chart or bodies on an operating table. They were people with stories, lives that I was beginning to be a part of. I found myself listening more, taking time to talk, to connect. It was something I hadn't realized I'd missed in the hustle of the city, this simple act of human connection. And with each interaction, I felt a little more grounded, a little more like myself. But it wasn't just the pace that was different. There was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. A subtle tension, a sense of things left unsaid. The townspeople were friendly enough, but there was a guardedness to their smiles, an undercurrent of caution in their conversations. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this place than met the eye, that beneath the surface of this idyllic seaside town lay secrets that no one was eager to reveal. One evening, after a particularly long day at the clinic, I decided to explore the town. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, and the air was cool and crisp. I wandered through the narrow alleys, past shuttered windows and weathered doors, until I found myself in front of an old, abandoned theater. It was a beautiful building, or at least it had been once. Its grand facade now cracked and faded, the once glorious marquee now missing most of its letters. Something about the theater called to me, a strange pull that made me stop and stare. I walked closer, my footsteps echoing in the empty street. The door was slightly ajar, and for a moment, I considered pushing it open, stepping inside to explore. But there was a heaviness in the air, a feeling of forgotten memories and lingering ghosts that made me hesitate. I stood there for a long moment, the cool breeze rustling through the nearby trees, before finally turning away and heading back to my cottage. As I walked back, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. The town was beautiful, yes, but there was something else here, something hidden in the shadows. I wondered if that was why I'd been drawn here, why I felt such a strong need to escape the city. Maybe it wasn't just the noise and the stress I was running from. Maybe I was running towards something I hadn't even realized I was looking for. When I finally reached my cottage, the sky was dark, the stars just beginning to peek through the clouds. I stood on the porch for a moment, staring out at the sea, the waves crashing rhythmically against the shore. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling that something was about to change, that my life was on the brink of something new and unknown. And as I stood there, the cool night air wrapping around me like a blanket, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready, ready to face whatever secrets this town held, ready to start a new chapter of my life. Little did I know, that evening would be the first of many that would lead me deeper into the mystery of this town, and into a story that would change my life forever. It had been a long week, one of those weeks where the weight of other people's pain and suffering seemed to stick to you, no matter how hard you try to shake it off. The clinic had been busier than usual, and while I had chosen this slower pace of life, there were still days when the demands of my profession threatened to overwhelm me. So by the time Friday evening rolled around, I was more than ready to unwind. I decided to treat myself to dinner at the small, quaint restaurant I had come to love since moving to this seaside town. The restaurant was tucked away on a quiet street, its exterior modest, almost easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But inside, it was a different world, warm, inviting with lemon-yellow walls that seemed to glow in the candlelight, and the smell of freshly baked bread mingling with the scent of the sea. The decor was simple but charming, with old photographs of fishermen proudly displayed on the walls and vases of fresh flowers on every table. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where you could lose yourself in a meal and forget about the world outside. As I stepped inside, I was greeted with the usual warmth. The staff knew me by now, and they always made sure to seat me at my favorite table by the window, where I could watch the town's evening life unfold. I sat down, ready to enjoy a quiet meal, when I noticed a strange atmosphere in the restaurant, something that hadn't been there before. The usual hum of conversation was overshadowed by the sound of stifled laughter and hushed whispers. Curious, I followed the direction of the noise. At a table near the back of the room, an elderly woman sat alone. She was fumbling with the menu, her hands trembling slightly as she turned the pages. Her clothes, though clean and neatly pressed, seemed out of place, too formal, too elegant for this casual seaside restaurant. There was something about her that caught my attention, something in the way she held herself, with a sort of faded dignity, as if she were desperately clinging to a past that no longer existed. The staff were watching her, barely containing their amusement. I saw one of the waitresses suppress a giggle as she handed the woman a glass of water, only to walk away and join the others in their whispered commentary. The woman seemed oblivious to it all, her focus entirely on the menu in front of her. I called over one of the waiters, a young man with an easy smile who had always been particularly attentive. "What's going on?" I asked quietly, nodding towards the elderly woman. The waiter leaned in, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "She comes in here every couple of weeks," he explained. "Always orders the most expensive dishes. Lobster, champagne, the works. Says her father is coming to pay, but of course he never does. Well, everyone thinks she's lost it, you know. Keeps acting like she's some kind of aristocrat." I looked back at the woman. There was something deeply unsettling about the scene. Yes, she was out of place, and yes, her behavior was odd, but there was a vulnerability to her that made my heart ache. The way she kept looking towards the door, as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment, someone who would never come. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story, something beneath the surface that no one else was seeing. Without thinking, I made a decision. "Bring her whatever she's ordered," I said to the waiter, my voice firm. "I'll take care of the bill." The waiter looked surprised, but he nodded. "Sure thing, Doc," he said before hurrying off to the kitchen. As I sat back in my chair, I couldn't help but watch the woman more closely. She eventually placed her order, lobster and champagne, just as the waiter had said. When the dishes arrived, her face lit up, and for a brief moment, she looked genuinely happy, as if she were transported back to a time when this was her reality, when dining on fine food and drink was a regular occurrence. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, her eyes occasionally drifting back to the door, waiting, hoping. I continued with my own meal, but my thoughts kept returning to the woman. Who was she? What had happened in her life that led her to this point, where she clung so fiercely to a life that had clearly slipped away? I couldn't imagine what it must feel like to be so lost in your own memories that the present no longer made sense. As she finished her meal, she carefully wiped her mouth with a napkin, stood up, and with as much grace as she could muster, walked out of the restaurant. The staff exchanged amused glances. but I didn't share their laughter. There was something profoundly sad about the whole situation, something that made me feel like I had only glimpsed the surface of a much deeper story. After she left, I asked for the check, paying for both my meal and hers. The staff thanked me, a mix of confusion and curiosity in their expressions, but I didn't feel like explaining myself. I stepped out into the cool night air, the scent of the sea washing over me, and began to walk towards the promenade. As I walked, I couldn't shake the image of the woman from my mind. The way she had looked at the door, her eyes filled with a longing that was almost palpable. There was a story there, something tragic and beautiful, and I felt a strange pull to uncover it. The town had seemed so simple, so peaceful when I first arrived, but now I was beginning to sense the hidden currents beneath its calm surface. Little did I know that this seemingly small act of kindness would be the first step into a web of intrigue and mystery that would soon consume my life. As the moonlit waves lapped against the shore, I couldn't help but feel that this town was about to reveal its secrets to me, and that the woman at the restaurant was just the beginning. The morning after my encounter with the elderly woman at the restaurant, I woke later than usual, the soft light of dawn already filling my cottage. The memory of the previous evening lingered in my mind like a half-remembered dream, the way she had looked so hopeful, so desperate for something that never came. I shook off the unease and decided to head back to the restaurant for breakfast. A part of me was curious to see if there would be any fallout from my intervention, but mostly I wanted to see if there was any more to the story. As I walked into the restaurant, the atmosphere was markedly different from the night before. The usual morning crowd was there, locals sipping coffee, a few tourists flipping through guidebooks. But there was a tension in the air, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. I took my usual seat by the window, the same one I had sat in the night before, and barely had time to glance at the menu when the waitress from the previous evening hurried over to my table. Her expression was a mix of excitement and concern, and before I could say anything, she blurted out, "Sir, we got a call this morning," from the elderly woman's daughter. I felt a jolt of surprise, and immediately my mind began to race. Had something happened to the woman after she left the restaurant? I nodded, urging her to continue. "The daughter. Her name is Sophia. She called to say that her mother passed away last night, just hours after leaving here," the waitress said, her voice low, as if speaking louder would make the news more real. She wanted to know if someone had paid for her mother's meal because she heard about what happened. A chill ran down my spine. Passed away? The news was shocking, but it also felt strangely inevitable, as if the woman had been holding on by a thread, and that evening had been her final attempt to reconnect with a world that no longer recognized her. I asked the waitress how Sophia had found out, and she explained that a friend of the family had been in the restaurant and had seen me pay the bill. "Sophia said she'd like to meet you, to thank you in person," the waitress added. She was very insistent. For a moment, I hesitated. A part of me wasn't sure if I wanted to get involved in this situation any further. But the intrigue, the mystery of the woman's life and her tragic end, drew me in. I nodded again, agreeing to meet Sophia. The waitress seemed relieved and left to fetch my order, leaving me alone with my thoughts. It wasn't long before the door of the restaurant swung open, and I saw her, Sophia. She was nothing like I had imagined. In my mind, I had pictured someone older, perhaps burdened by the years spent caring for a mother who was slipping away. But Sophia was young, strikingly so, with a beauty that was at once delicate and arresting. She had long dark hair that cascaded over her shoulders and eyes that held a deep sadness, as if she carried the weight of her mother's life on her own slender shoulders. She spotted me immediately, our eyes locking across the room. There was something magnetic in her gaze, a pull that made it impossible to look away. She moved towards me with a grace that was almost ethereal, and as she reached my table, I stood up, feeling oddly nervous. "Are you Leo?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. I nodded. "Yes, and you must be Sophia." She smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curve of her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I wanted to thank you for what you did for my mother last night. It meant more to her, and to me, than you could ever know. Please, sit down," I offered, gesturing to the chair across from me. She took it, and for a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of what had happened between us heavy in the air. My mother, Sophia began, her voice faltering slightly. She wasn't always like that, you know. She used to be different. Before everything changed. I leaned in, sensing that there was much more to the story, something hidden beneath the surface. What happened? I asked gently, trying not to push too hard. Sophia took a deep breath, as if steeling herself to relive the past. It's a long story, she said, her eyes drifting to the window, where the morning light filtered in, casting soft shadows on the table. But I suppose you have a right to know, given how you helped her. She told me about her mother's life, how she had once been a vibrant, charismatic woman, full of life and laughter. But that all changed when she lost the love of her life in a tragic accident. Sophia's father had been the center of her mother's world, and when he was gone, it was as if the light in her eyes had dimmed forever. She never fully recovered from the loss, and over the years, her grief slowly eroded her mind, leaving her trapped in a past that no longer existed. What you saw last night, Sophia continued, her voice thick with emotion, was my mother trying to reclaim a piece of that past. She and my father used to dine at that restaurant all the time, back when they were happy. It was their place, so in her mind, she was waiting for him to walk through that door and take her home. The sadness in her words was almost unbearable, and I found myself reaching across the table, taking her hand in mine. It was a bold move, but the connection between us was undeniable, and I felt an overwhelming need to comfort her, to let her know that she wasn't alone in her pain. Sophia, I said quietly, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your mother, she was holding on to something that she couldn't let go of, but that doesn't make it any less tragic. She looked down at our hands, a tear slipping down her cheek. I've been living in her shadow for so long, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, caring for her, watching her slip away, day by day. And now that she's gone, I don't know who I am without her. There was a vulnerability in her words that struck me deeply. I could see that she was more than just a daughter grieving her mother. She was a woman who had lost her own sense of self in the process. And in that moment, I felt a connection with her that went beyond sympathy. It was as if her pain resonated with something deep inside me, something I hadn't even realized was there. Sophia, I said, my voice firm but gentle, you don't have to figure this out alone. I'm here and I want to help. Whatever that means, whatever you need, I'm here. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else, something that made my heart skip a beat. It was the beginning of something, though I couldn't quite define what it was yet. But I knew one thing for certain. Meeting Sophia had changed everything. What had started as an act of kindness towards a stranger had now drawn me into a story much deeper and more complex than I had ever imagined. As we sat there, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. The quiet hum of the restaurant, the clinking of dishes, the distant murmur of conversation, all of it blurred into the background. All that mattered was the connection forming between us, the unspoken understanding that we were two souls who had found each other in the most unexpected of ways. Little did I know, this meeting was just the beginning of a journey that would take us both into the heart of the town's secrets, uncovering truths that had been buried for years, and leading us towards a future neither of us could have anticipated. But for now, all I could think about was the woman sitting across from me, and the strange, undeniable feeling that my life was about to change in ways I could never have imagined. The days that followed my meeting with Sophia were a whirlwind of emotion and discovery. There was something about her that captivated me, an intensity, a depth of character that I couldn't ignore. We began spending more time together, our conversations growing longer, more intimate. We talked about everything, the past, our dreams, our fears, but the shadow of her mother's tragic story always lingered in the background like an unfinished chapter waiting to be resolved. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town in shades of orange and pink, Sophia and I found ourselves walking along the beach. The sea was calm, the waves gently lapping at the shore, and the air was filled with the scent of salt and the distant cry of seagulls. There was a peacefulness in the moment, a tranquility that made it easier to speak of difficult things. I want to show you something, Sophia said suddenly, her voice soft yet filled with an unspoken urgency. She stopped walking and looked at me, her eyes searching mine as if trying to gauge my reaction. "There's a place that was very important to my mother, and to me. I think it might help you understand her better." Intrigued, I nodded, ready to follow wherever she led. We left the beach and made our way through the town, the streets growing narrower and darker as we moved away from the bustling center. Eventually, we arrived at a large, abandoned building, its once grand facade now crumbling with age. The windows were shattered. The paint peeling and vines had begun to reclaim the structure, winding their way up the walls like nature's slow revenge on man-made decay. "This is the theater where my mother used to perform," Sophia explained, her voice tinged with a mix of nostalgia and sorrow. "It was once the heart of this town, a place of beauty and culture. But now, it's just a shell, forgotten by everyone except my mother." The theater loomed before us, imposing and eerie, as if it held on to the echoes of its former glory. Sophia pushed open the heavy, creaking door, and we stepped inside. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the broken windows above, casting jagged beams of moonlight across the dusty floor. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, and the silence was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. We walked through the main hall, our footsteps muffled by layers of dust and debris. The rows of seats were still there, though most were broken or covered in cobwebs, and the stage, once the centerpiece of countless performances, now sagged under the weight of years of neglect. As we moved deeper into the theater, I could almost hear the ghosts of the past whispering around us, the faint echoes of applause and laughter that had long since faded into memory. Sophia led me backstage, where the atmosphere grew even heavier. The dressing rooms were still intact, though they were filled with the remnants of a bygone era. Old costumes hanging limply from rusted hooks, cracked mirrors that reflected only darkness, and forgotten props scattered across the floor. It was as if time had stopped here, trapping the theater in a perpetual state of decay, forever haunted by the memories of those who had once graced its stage. "My mother's dressing room is this way," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she were afraid to disturb the spirits that lingered in the shadows. She led me down a narrow corridor, the walls closing in around us, until we reached a door with a faded nameplate that read Beatrix. Sophia hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. Inside, the room was small, the air thick with dust and the scent of old perfume. A vanity mirror stood against one wall, its surface cracked but still reflecting the ghostly outline of the room. The furniture was sparse: a single chair, a small table, and a wardrobe that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. The room felt suffocating, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something. Sophia walked over to the vanity and picked up a small, faded photograph that had been lying there. She handed it to me, and I saw that it was a picture of her mother, younger and more vibrant, standing next to a man who could only have been her father. They were both smiling, their arms wrapped around each other, and there was a look of pure joy in their eyes, a stark contrast to the sorrow I had seen in the elderly woman's face at the restaurant. "This was taken just before everything changed," Sophia said, her voice thick with emotion. "They were so happy, so in love. But then my father died, and my mother was never the same. She kept coming back here, trying to recapture what she'd lost, as if she could bring him back by reliving those memories." As I looked around the room, I could feel the weight of Sophia's words, the heavy sense of loss that permeated the air. It was as if this place had become a tomb for her mother's grief, a shrine to a past that could never be reclaimed. I could see now why Sophia had brought me here. This theater was more than just a building. It was the key to understanding her mother's decline, a window into the pain that had driven her to the brink of madness. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. In the far corner of the room, partially hidden beneath a pile of old costumes, was a small, worn, leather-bound journal. I picked it up, wiping away the dust, and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was elegant, delicate, clearly belonging to someone who had taken great care with their words. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the journal. Sophia frowned, moving closer to get a better look. "I've never seen that before," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "It must have belonged to my mother, but I don't know why she never mentioned it. I began to flip through the pages, each one filled with notes, sketches, and what appeared to be scripts, fragments of plays that her mother had been working on, ideas that had never seen the light of day. But as I neared the end of the journal, the tone shifted. The entries became more personal, more chaotic, filled with scribbled lines that hinted at a mind unraveling. There were mentions of a mysterious man, someone her mother had met after her father's death, someone who had promised to help her but had only driven her further into despair. "This isn't just a journal," I said slowly, my mind racing with the implications. "It's a record of your mother's descent, and whoever this man was, he played a part in it." Sophia's eyes widened, her face paling as the realization set in. "You think he did something to her? Manipulated her?" I nodded, my pulse quickening. "It's possible. Whoever he was, he seems to have had a significant influence on her. And if we can find out who he is, we might be able to understand what really happened to your mother." Sophia looked at me, a mixture of fear and determination in her eyes. "We have to find out," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor I could hear beneath it. "We have to know the truth." And so the mystery deepened. What had started as a simple act of kindness had now drawn us into a web of secrets, lies, and hidden pain that stretched far beyond what either of us had imagined. The town, with its quiet charm and picturesque facade, was beginning to reveal its darker side, and I knew that we were only just scratching the surface. As we left the theater that night, the journal clutched tightly in Sophia's hands. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of something big, something that would change everything we thought we knew about her mother, and perhaps even about ourselves. The past was beginning to unveil itself, and with it, the truth that had been buried for so long. But the question remained, were we ready to face what we might find? The discovery of the journal had changed everything. Sophia and I spent hours poring over its contents, deciphering the faded ink and fragmented thoughts that documented her mother's tragic descent. The mysterious man mentioned in the later entries haunted our conversations, a shadowy figure who seemed to have played a pivotal role in her mother's unraveling. But despite our best efforts, we found little more than hints and allusions. A name here, a cryptic note there. It was as if her mother had been trying to tell us something, but the message was obscured by the chaos of her mind. Our search for answers became an obsession. We visited the town's archives, combed through old records, and spoke to anyone who might have known Sophia's mother during those final years. The town, once a backdrop for our growing affection, was now a labyrinth of secrets, each corner potentially holding a clue to the mystery we were unraveling. Through it all, something deeper was growing between us. The intensity of our shared quest forged a bond that neither of us could ignore. Every late-night conversation, every shared glance over a piece of forgotten history, brought us closer. It was as if the very act of uncovering the past was drawing us together, as if the tangled threads of Sophia's mother's life were weaving a new story, our story. One evening, after another long day of searching, we found ourselves back at the cottage. The day had been frustrating, yielding little new information, and the exhaustion weighed heavily on both of us. We sat together on the small porch, the night air cool against our skin, the sound of the waves crashing rhythmically in the distance. The moon was high, casting a silver glow over the landscape, making everything look almost ethereal. Sophia was unusually quiet, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I could sense the turmoil within her, the weight of everything we had discovered, and the even greater weight of what we had yet to uncover. I reached out and took her hand, needing to feel that connection, to remind her that she wasn't alone in this. "Leo," she began, her voice soft but filled with a quiet intensity. "I've been thinking about everything we found out, everything we're still trying to understand, and I can't help but feel like we're on the edge of something big. But I'm also scared of what we might find. Scared of what it could mean for me, for my family, for us." I turned to face her, seeing the uncertainty in her eyes, the vulnerability she rarely let show. "Sophia," I said gently, "whatever we find, we'll face it together. You don't have to carry this alone. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine as if seeking reassurance. "But what if we uncover something terrible? What if it changes everything? I squeezed her hand, drawing her closer. It might, but I believe we're stronger together than apart. Whatever happens, whatever we find, we'll deal with it. We're not just uncovering the past. We're building something new, something that's ours. She leaned into me then, resting her head on my shoulder, and for a long moment we sat in silence, the only sound the distant roar of the sea. There was something profoundly comforting in that silence, a sense of rightness that I hadn't felt in a long time. Being with Sophia, sharing this journey with her, felt like the beginning of something bigger than both of us. Something that had the power to heal old wounds and create something beautiful in their place. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted from the past to the future. We talked about what life could look like after the mystery was solved, after the shadows that hung over her family were dispelled. It was the first time we had allowed ourselves to imagine a life beyond the investigation, beyond the grief and loss that had brought us together. And as we talked, I realized just how much I wanted that future, with her. The days that followed were filled with a strange mixture of normalcy and anticipation. We continued our investigation, piecing together fragments of information that led us ever closer to the truth. But at the same time, we began to carve out moments for ourselves, moments where we could just be two people falling in love, unburdened by the weight of the past. One such moment came on a warm, sunny afternoon. We decided to take a break from our search and spent the day by the sea, something we hadn't done since our relationship had begun to deepen. We walked along the beach, the sand warm beneath our feet, and as the day wore on, we found ourselves drawn to a secluded cove where the waves gently lapped at the shore and the world seemed to fall away. We sat together on a large, flat rock, watching the sun dip lower in the sky, casting everything in a golden hue. There was a sense of peace in that place, a feeling that for a little while we could escape the weight of everything that had happened, everything that was still to come. As we watched the sunset, Sophia turned to me, a soft smile on her lips. "You know," she said, her voice light but sincere, "I never thought I'd find something like this. Not after everything that happened with my mother. But with you, I feel like I can finally breathe again." Her words sent a warmth through me that was more intense than the sun's rays. I reached out and cupped her face in my hands, brushing a stray strand of hair away from her eyes. "I feel the same way, Sophia. I never expected this either, but now that it's here, I don't want to let it go." And then, without thinking, I leaned in and kissed her. It was a slow, lingering kiss, one that spoke of everything we had been through, everything we were still discovering about each other. When we finally pulled apart, there was no need for words. The connection between us was stronger than ever, solidified by everything we had shared and everything we were building together. The next day, something shifted. We returned to the investigation with renewed determination, driven by a shared purpose. But this time, there was something else guiding us, a sense that whatever we uncovered, whatever dark secrets still lurked in the shadows, we would face them together, as a team, as partners. And then it happened. In a dusty corner of the town's archives, hidden among stacks of forgotten documents, we found the clue we had been searching for, a letter, yellowed with age, written in the same delicate hand as the journal. It was addressed to Sophia's mother, but it wasn't from her mysterious lover. It was from someone even more unexpected. As we read the letter together, our hands trembling with anticipation, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The man who had influenced Sophia's mother wasn't just a lover. He was part of something much larger, something that reached into the very heart of the town's history. The letter hinted at a conspiracy, a cover-up that had been hidden for decades, and suddenly everything made sense. The secrecy, the strange events, the unspoken tension that had always hung over the town. But the revelation wasn't just about the past. It had implications for the present, for Sophia, and for me. We realized that uncovering the truth would change everything, not just for her family, but for the entire town. And as the weight of that realization settled over us, we knew we had reached a turning point. That night, as we sat together in the cottage, the letter spread out on the table before us. I took Sophia's hand in mine. "Whatever happens next," I said, my voice steady, "we face it together. No more secrets, no more lies, just us." She looked at me, her eyes filled with determination and something else, something that spoke of a future that was no longer just a possibility, but a certainty. Together, she agreed, her voice strong, no matter what. And in that moment, I knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, not just in our investigation, but in our lives. The past had brought us together, but it was the future that would keep us united. We had faced darkness, uncovered secrets, and found love in the most unexpected of places. Now, as we prepared to reveal the truth, we were ready to write the next part of our story, a story that would be ours, no matter what challenges lay ahead.